Somehow the Chargers got 6 games in primetime under Brandon Staley in 2023, yet with Jim Harbaugh at the helm, they're only scheduled to have 3 primetime games in 2024, which I think is a huge missed opportunity by the NFL.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer. And we've been covering the Chargers now for 8 seasons together, but this is our 6th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen. We always appreciate you guys. And to make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Well, Daniel, after a 5-12 season, I was expecting that the Chargers primetime games were going to go down from last year, but I did not expect 3. I figured with Jim Harbaugh being the head coach of the Chargers now that they would get more than that. But speaking of Jim Harbaugh, what are the expectations for Coach Harbaugh with his first year as the head coach of the Chargers? And is 13 wins crazy? A tier definitely does not think so.
Yeah, well, a tier's a little crazy, and that's why we love them. But today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. David, we wanted to continue getting into some of this schedule stuff here because there's still so much to go over with it. But thankfully, it's Fan Mail Friday, and we got a lot of great schedule questions, including this first one from Zachary Shelton, a.k.a. Superfan Zach, who's asking, are you surprised that bringing in Jim Harbaugh, that all the number of primetime games that the team got was dropped from 6 to 3? Personally, I think that's too big of a drop. Zach, I 100% agree with you. I think that it would be hard for me to think of another coach that carries as much buzz going into this season than Jim Harbaugh does. I understand that they got burnt last year, right? They ended up with a 63-21 game on Amazon Prime. They ended up with the Bills game with Easton Stick going up against them at the end of the season. I totally understand that, but that was the mistake you made last year, right? That was a Brandon Staley-led team, and obviously Justin Herbert got hurt for 2 of those games at the end of the season, so hard to really hold that against it, but I just think that for me, I can't think of a coach I want putting on a headset after a victory to give a press conference to ESPN or Fox or NBC that's going to actually say some stuff more than I want Jim Harbaugh. I mean, the dude's literally known for what's happened post-game as far as his antics, whether it's the Jim Schwartz, handshake or whatever it may be. That's a dude I want on that headset afterwards. So to potentially miss out on some of those opportunities and give the Chargers just 3 primetime games, I truly think is a mistake by the NFL.
It's a huge mistake, Daniel. I mean, this guy has a presence. This guy, when he walks into a room, eyes are glued to him. I mean, the same thing applies to TV sets. When he's on the TV set, he's a guy that you want to watch because of his mannerisms and the way he carries himself. He's just a very entertaining dude. So, honestly, I was expecting them to get at least 4 primetime games. I figured the Jim Harbaugh effect would be able to have that. And obviously you're pairing him with Justin Herbert too, who's still one of the most electric quarterbacks in the NFL. I definitely can still see, and there is that possibility of them getting flexed into another primetime game if the Chargers are in contention and, if they're playing well. I think a potential flex game could be that Week 18 game against the Raiders. If both teams are playing well, that could be a game I could see that gets flexed.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happened a couple of years ago when it was the tie-in, get-in year. And, I mean, coming off of the 2022 season when the Chargers were in the playoffs, I could understand getting more last year, but they also failed spectacularly once they got there, right, in that game against the Jaguars. So when you're talking about what the primetime games are, it's kind of interesting games, too, at least the first one. Week 7, Monday Night Football against Arizona. I guess the 4th pick going up against the 5th pick, I guess, is the storyline there. I'm not sure. Week 12 against the Ravens, at home. That one was totally, we all knew it was coming. The Harbaugh Bowl had to be in primetime. And then Week 14 at Kansas City in Arrowhead. That's another good game. Both of those games make sense. I just feel like it's a missed opportunity because like I said, I don't think there's a coach that has more buzz around him going into the season. Maybe Andy Reid, who we know doesn't really say anything, going for his 3rd straight Super Bowl. I don't know. If there's a coach out there, maybe I'm not thinking about it, you can put it in the comments if you want, that has more buzz right now than the national championship winning coach from last year making his leap to the NFL and leaving Michigan. I don't know if it would be hard for me to
Yeah.
agree with that. I mean, he's definitely the new coach that has the most buzz around him. I don't know who else it would be, right? I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer. But going from 6 with Brandon to 3 with Jim Harbaugh just seems crazy. The Jets having 6 primetime games seems absolutely crazy because I think they might be the 3rd best team in the AFC East behind the Dolphins and the Bills. And I just think that, it's probably an Aaron Rodgers farewell tour or whatever. But the Chargers under Brandon Staley, 7-9 in primetime games. So maybe that just left a sour taste in their mouth. And what happened at the end of last year with that Bills game, even though it ended up being a competitive game, and then obviously the Raiders game, which was a terrible game, but landed the Chargers, Jim Harbaugh. So let's get to this next question here from shamelessly positive Ryan, who says, what do you make of the Bolts not having a Thursday night game? Personally, I don't mind it since they'll have more rest in between games. This is one of the reasons they only have 3. Is because they don't have a Thursday night game. And honestly, hand up, I thought everybody got a Thursday night football game. The Carolina Panthers have 0 primetime games, so obviously they don't have a Thursday night football game either. That one, I think I would rather have 3 primetime games, though, than to have 4 and have one of them be a Thursday night game.
Yeah, I'm definitely not mad about that at all. I mean, Thursday night games are brutal. I mean, football is a violent sport, a nasty sport. Playing on Sunday and then getting only 3 days to recover and game plan, and then have to go out there and play another game is rough. Like, it is absolutely awful. But also, I think another thing that plays a factor in this is the Chargers are going to be traveling more than any other team in the NFL next year. They are going to be flying a total of 26,803 miles, which is almost 1,000 more miles than the second place team, which is the Miami Dolphins. I think that definitely plays into the calculus when deciding when or if they were going to play on Thursday night.
I mean, it's definitely not the quality of the team that's part of it, just because I know we're going to see some really, really bad Thursday night football games because we always do. But yeah, I mean, I don't mind them not having a Thursday night game. I think the travel thing, the one thing about that is like, the coastal teams are always going to get screwed. Like, that just is what it is. The Chargers are playing, Southern California, which is about as far away from New England as can be. It's as far away from Baltimore as can be. Not they're playing in those places, but I'm just saying, like, with the teams they're going to have to go play, it's going to be a ton of miles no matter what their season schedule looks like. That just is what it is. But it is having an effect on the player. That kind of travel definitely affects the player. So not having that Thursday game definitely benefits them from that standpoint. But let's have this from JT the Nut, who says, happy there's no Thursday games. We agree on that. But sad at the week 5 bye week. Do early bye weeks really have that big of an effect on the team? What do you think?
I think it absolutely does. I mean, I think when you look at that, like, I think if you were to ask most teams, they would probably want their bye week to be as close to the middle of the season as humanly possible, because, it gives them some time to get them off their feet, allow their bodies to kind of recover and heal, and then get ready for that second stretch of the season. Here, you have an early bye week, and then after that bye week, you have 13 straight weeks of games with no rest and no break.
At least.
That frankly sucks. Like, that's really, really hard to deal with. And it's the second year in a row that they have the early bye. I hate it. I'm not a fan of it. It sucks that they have to do this to the Chargers again.
Honestly, like, to me, I feel like it'd be so much simpler is like if you had week 11 and week 12 to have half of the teams in the NFL take a bye week, so you're not losing out on a whole weekend of football because you still have half the teams playing. And then the next week, you have the other half of the NFL teams play. Everybody has their bye weeks within 2 weeks. Nobody has a significant advantage over anyone else.
Seems logical to me.
Yeah, it's just something I thought of, just like, why don't they do that? And it's just because they want money and they get more games possible, and they want as little teams not playing any given weekend as they possibly can.
Yeah.
And they're, going to Friday games and Tuesday games, and, it's just all a money-making total, like, system. But
oh, yeah.
With the bye week in week 5, like you said, nobody wants to play 13 weeks in a row. I think when the bye week happens, a lot of it has to depend on what your injury status is at that time. So,
of course,
week 5 could be a great week if you have a couple of guys who are banged up and wouldn't have been able to play in week 5 anyways. But for the most part, especially when you're talking about a team you're hoping makes the playoffs, you don't want them playing 13 games as they head into the playoffs in the most important game of their season with no extra rest. That just is what it is, because especially even with the Thursday game, without the Thursday game, you don't even get kind of the mini bye week that you would get with a Thursday night football game, which is fine. I'm okay with them not having a Thursday night football game, but going 13 straight weeks at least definitely affects the team. I don't think that there's any way to look at it other than that. So I think the bye week, and when it happens, is important. I think, whether it's week 5 or week 6, maybe that's negligible, but overall having it early in the season, I don't think benefits the Chargers. And I don't think it benefited them last year, really, even though they had some guys banged up. I don't think that benefits them in 2024. But we do have a great question about just, should the Chargers have deep playoff run expectations in year 1 under Jim Harbaugh, or will it take some time to build up? So we're going to get into that and a Tier's crazy prediction and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, though, I need to tell you guys it's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. And the reason that's such a great offer that they have going on right now is you can literally pick the biggest favorite on any given night with the money line, so they don't have to cover a spread or anything. And as long as that huge favorite wins, you get $150 in bonus bets at one of the best times of the year to be betting on sports. Because right now, if you like the NBA playoffs, if you like the NHL playoffs, that's great. You know what's better? When you have some action with FanDuel on those and you have live in-game betting, you have same game parlays that you can be even adding more juice to it. I mean, I know I sit there on the couch just like, it's just almost too much because I love it so much and there's so many great things going on already. Then you add FanDuel on top of it, it makes the playoffs even better than they already were if that was at all possible. So if you guys want to get in on the action, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, David, let's continue this Fan Mail Friday here because we have a lot of great questions and a lot of great voicemails. I mean, we're not even going to be able to fit all of the voicemails. I know we say that, and it's almost always true. This year, really, really exceptional questions, or this week, I should say, very exceptional questions. A lot of good stuff to get into. But let's start with this because we have a voicemail here from Daniel in Tennessee. Different Daniel, obviously still a great name. Let's see what he has for us this week.
Hey, this is Daniel, lifelong Chargers fan all the way here in Sparta, Tennessee. I just had probably a simple question for you guys. I just want to know, what's your guys' expectations this year under Jim Harbaugh? Do you think it might take him a season or two to get everything together to get us a playoff run going, or do you think he's just going to come right out the gate and we're going to make a deep playoff run this year? That's just what I wanted to ask you guys. So go Bolts. Y'all have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you for calling in, Daniel, and that Daniel's accent is much better than mine, which I don't know if I have. Maybe a Southern California accent, I don't know, but it doesn't sound cool like that. David, I think this is a question a lot of Chargers fans are asking themselves, and I think many are cautiously optimistic, including myself, right? But it's hard to know. How long will it take for him to turn it around? Because he has, taken over college teams, and it's taken a few seasons in the case of like Stanford. Even with Michigan, it didn't all click right away. But in the NFL, he has one time he's made the leap from college to the NFL, and they went to an NFC championship game in their first season. So how crazy is it? What are your expectations? Do you think it's going to take some time? What do you expect from him this year?
I mean, not just even his first season, his first 3 straight seasons he went to the NFC championship.
Sure,
game,
but those seasons he had to build, right? So like
Sure.
he took over a 6-10 team in 2010
Right. Yeah.
and then took that team to the NFC championship the next. He's only going to have his one first season, right? So I
Yeah.
think that's what it's more about.
I feel like, as far as the Chargers organization is concerned, they expect to compete for the playoffs. And I believe Jim Harbaugh expects to compete for the playoffs as well. For me, my expectations are that they're in the hunt, that they are seriously in pursuit of making it to the playoffs. I think they have a very good chance with their schedule to be a wild card team. I'm not going to say much more than that at this point in time, as we have several months before the season actually starts. But I feel like if the Chargers are healthy, that they should definitely have expectations of at least competing for a playoff spot.
I think that's totally fair, and I think that's where I'm at as well. I expect a winning season, right?
Yes.
I expect them to win. That's the biggest thing for me. 5th easiest schedule in the league, even though we've talked about it, you have to kind of take that with a grain of salt. But like, there's a path there for a winning season this year, and I just don't see it being Jim Harbaugh's first losing season in the NFL. I do think they will fight for a playoff spot. I think they will finish with a winning record. But we also have to understand that this is a roster that's been majorly overhauled.
Yeah.
They took over a team with a crazy bloated salary cap situation and had to make a bunch of moves because of that. If the Chargers do make the playoffs, however, as far as the deep playoff run, it'll mean that what they're trying to do is taking shape. It'll mean that the identity that they wanted to forge is happening. And like we talked about yesterday, that means they're a team that's meant to play in January and December. A team that can play in cold weather, a team that is a physical brand of football you don't want to play late in the year. So I wouldn't, if they make the playoffs, I think everything's on the table. I think you talked about Jim Harbaugh expecting this team to compete for a playoffs. I think Jim Harbaugh expects this team to be playing in a Super Bowl. I don't think Jim Harbaugh
he said as much, right?
Works any other way.
Yeah.
But I think when you have the precedent of him taking the 49ers, who were 6-10 in 2010, to an NFC championship game in his first season, you have to be cautiously optimistic. I just think right now there's so many question marks, especially on the defensive side. I think the other big thing here, you're taking a ton of chances with a lot of guys that have extensive injury histories. You're taking a ton of chances on a lot of guys that did not play well in 2023.
A lot of one-year deals.
There's a lot of variance with this team. So I do think this will be a winning team just by purely what Joe Ortiz has been able to do and how I feel like Jim Harbaugh is going to lead this team. After that, we'll see what happens. But we do have a tier calling in who's a little bit more optimistic than I am about this season, at least as far as at this point.
Hi, Dan. Hi, David. This is a tier. My record prediction is I got the Bolts start the season 4-0, win over the Chiefs, take a 2-game lead, and finish the season 13-4 AFC West champ. What do you think? Crossover Thursday. How about style? Coming soon. Let's go.
Let's go. That's here. I love you. David, is he crazy?
Yeah, I think a little bit. I mean, I just think it's
way.
a little bit too ambitious to sit here and say, with some legitimate question marks on both sides of the ball, that they're going to sit here and rip off a 13-win season after going 5-12. I just think there's just way too much turnover to expect that. Now, if that does happen, it's just so many things that have to go right? They have to stay healthy. They have to get those one-year deals to pay off. Like, those guys have to come in and they need to turn their careers around right away. And they need to have several 2024 draft picks that make an impact on this team right away. I'm definitely not in that 13-win range, but I feel like I can see anywhere from 9 to 11 pretty comfortably next season.
Yeah, I think for me, it's between 9 and 12 as far as what I think the reasonable outcomes are. I think 13 wins tells me that's the best possible scenario.
Absolutely.
That's if everything goes right, then maybe you could sell me on it. But as far as the AFC West goes, it's just I've done it too many times. I've bought in too many times where even with Jim Harbaugh,
same,
they're going to have to dethrone the Chiefs, and I have to see it before I believe it. Or in the words of Patrick Mahomes, I'll believe it when I'll see it when I believe it.
Yeah, you said it right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Patrick Mahomes said it best, obviously, but I can't give it to him. I'm not going to take the throne away from the Chiefs, the back-to-back Super Bowl champions, until I see Jim Harbaugh rip it out of Andy Reid's cold dead hands. I just can't.
And I would love to see nothing more than that happen, Daniel.
It's possible, and we'll see. We'll see how they play, and we'll see how they match up against each other, because those games they play against each other is going to have a lot to do with who ends up winning that division at the end of the season.
Yep.
Let's get to this next question here from Bolt Runner, who asks, will the Harbaugh effect increase dramatically the size of the Chargers fan base? Love the show. Start my day right with breakfast on the table and Locked On Chargers on the TV. We love that. We are on TV too. You find us on TV. David, this is a hard question. I'll just put it like that. It's so hard to quantify what the increase in fandom is. What do you think?
Honestly, I think the hiring of Jim Harbaugh it definitely has instilled some belief and some confidence in the Chargers fan base. I think that more people will be willing to keep their tickets as opposed to selling them. So I think that they will have more of a home field advantage than they have in a very long time. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I think what does that look like, right? More than what they had in Brandon Staley isn't setting, that's not a very high bar. Will they have more? Sure. I'm sure that Jim Harbaugh gives them a little bit more off the bat. Whether that turns into a substantial difference in home field advantage, we'll know week one. When you have a well-traveling fan base with the Raiders coming into town and you have a chance in Jim Harbaugh's first game to take over that stadium and give the team an actual advantage. They haven't had it since they've moved up to Los Angeles. Period. End of story. They haven't. They're also right now, the 7th or 8th most popular team in Los Angeles? You have the Lakers, you have the Kings, you have the Clippers, USC, UCLA, LAFC, the Dodgers. I mean, there might even be more. You have to win. You have to win. And you have to not only win once. Look at the Rams crowds after winning a Super Bowl. It's not just winning a Super Bowl. You have to win year in and year out, and you have to build something that's consistent and draws people in every single season. And the Chargers are behind the 8 ball in that regard. I do think that Jim Harbaugh is the coach that would gain them the most fans out of any coach they could have hired. I think that's piquing the interest of many people who will casually tune in to see if it's real.
Oh, yeah.
But to actually get a substantial amount of fans and a substantial increase in home field advantage, I think you have to win. And I just think that in an oversaturated sports market in Los Angeles, I just think that's the only way, because you're going up against prestige and pedigree and teams that have done it and teams who have been there. And that's not an easy fight, and I've said that since the beginning. But we do have more to get to because it is Fan Mail Friday, and we have some more great questions, including what is this running back rotation going to look like? Who would we like to get the most carries between J.K. Dobbins, between Gus Edwards, Kimani Vidal? What about Isaiah Spiller? Is that just over? Are we done with Isaiah Spiller? Is that a foregone conclusion? We're getting to that and much more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, I need to tell you guys about eBay Motors, because passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance: superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. David, we still have some great fan mail questions to get into, and thank you to everyone who hit us up at Locked On LAC and all of the everydayers for checking out today's show, including what this running back rotation is going to look like, because I think it was a little clear when they had Gus Edwards, then became a little murkier when you signed J.K. Dobbins, and then you draft Kimani Vidal. You also have Isaiah Spiller that's just kind of hanging out there as well. I think there's a lot of uncertainty in that running back room right now, but I do want to tell everyone to make sure they're checking out the Locked On Sports Today, first ever national 24/7 sports streaming channel, where they're covering everything going on around the country with local experts that give you insight that you can only get by people who are covering their team every day. So make sure you guys go subscribe to Locked On Sports Today, the first ever national 24/7 sports streaming channel. Let's get to this question here, David, from Chargers Hawk. Definitely one of our best question askers, and been on many shows. And he asked today, assuming J.K. Dobbins is back to full health, sidebar, that's a huge assumption. By the start of the season, how would you prefer they split the running back workload? Do you think a true even split is best, or would you favor one back for more work? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think just looking at what it has been under Greg Roman, I think a pretty good example would be back in 2020, where they had J.K. Dobbins, who played 15 games, had 134 carries. Gus Edwards played 16 games, had 144 carries. And then they had Mark Ingram that also got 72 carries. I think this is definitely going to be a running back by committee approach. And they also have different running backs that have different particular skill sets. Gus Edwards is a short yardage monster. I think he's going to get the bulk of those particular type of carries. I think J.K. Dobbins is going to get his share of carries if he's healthy. And then, I think they're going to work in Kimani Vidal as well. But I feel like Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins are probably going to be the two guys that get the majority of the carries. I do feel like they're going to be stretches where they ride the hot hand. I think that just happens naturally in the flow of a football game. But I feel like they're going to utilize all of their running backs.
Yeah, I think at J.K. Dobbins, I have a hard time believing before I see it just that the explosiveness is fully back there. I mean, I think if you were talking about prime J.K. Dobbins with after the litany of career, season-ending, career-threatening injuries that he's had, like, it's hard to see it right now before we see him out there breaking tackles, and having that same sort of juice. I'm very, very excited to see what he looks like at training camp. But if he's 100%, he's the best back on the team, period. That's just, it is what it is. He is that guy. He should get a slight probably boost above Gus Edwards. At the same time, you're probably trying to limit the bullets that you're, shooting early in the season with someone like J.K. Dobbins. You want him around in November and December and January. So I don't think that he's going to just be the bell cow guy. And Joe Hortiz said Gus Edwards is the bell cow guy. He's the most physical guy. He's the guy that fits what Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh want to turn this team into. So I do think it'll be a pretty even split between those two guys. And then you have Kimani Vidal, who I believe is the change of pace, third down back. We know that he's a really, really good pass protector coming out of college.
Very.
That was definitely one of his biggest strengths. And I do think it is situational. If it's short yardage goal line, you have Gus Edwards. If it's between the 20s and you want someone that's more of a home run threat, you have J.K. Dobbins, who can eat up a lot of yards. And I think that when you have Kamani Vidal, you kind of know what he does well. And if one of those guys gets hurt, he can move into a larger role if he needs to. The interesting thing is Isaiah Spiller, because he's kind of lost in the wash, drafted by a former regime, neglected by 2 offensive coordinators. So what does that mean for him going into 2024? Let's hear what Joe has for us this week.
Hey guys, it's Joe from Jersey. I have this little affair with Isaiah Spiller. I'm not sure why. I don't feel like he got an adequate chance with Brandon Staley. I don't think Brandon Staley coached him up very well. I'm hoping Jim Harbaugh can. What's your take on Isaiah Spiller? What do you think of his chances? I know we signed, a couple guys and we drafted another. Do you think he's kind of done, or do you think he's going to get an opportunity? Do you know anything about the situation? I'd love to hear what you have to say. Go Bulls.
It's tough, David. I think we all wanted to see what Isaiah Spiller could do. At the same time, we're talking about a regime that not only went out and signed 2 free agent running backs, but also drafted a running back as well, leaving Isaiah Spiller, at least initially, on the outside looking in as far as carries, as far as playing time, potentially even making this team.
I mean, I think that's 100% fair. I mean, honestly, I agree that he did not get a fair shake. I mean, he never really got a true opportunity. But at times, he just wasn't, I guess, apparently good enough to get on the football field. That's what the coaches were telling us when they were making him inactive, game after game after game. But yeah, he has no ties to the current regime. They went out there and signed 2 running backs, drafted another one, which kind of tells you exactly how they feel about Isaiah Spiller. I mean, they just don't have a lot of confidence in his ability. And you kind of feel like there's 3 running backs that are almost locks to make this roster.
Yeah.
And so Isaiah Spiller is going to have to force his way onto this roster to make this team this year.
And a lot of it could come down to how many running backs they want to carry. And I like Kamani Vidal a lot. I was so about Isaiah Spiller. I liked what he was able to do against SEC competition. Maybe we've, weighted that a little bit too much. I think the hard thing is you've seen 2 different offensive coordinators make this dude a healthy scratch and have him not be able to crack the top 3 running backs that are active on game day. I think you saw an undrafted free agent, Elijah Dotson, who's still around.
Yep.
That was active before him on game day. I don't think he's ever been able to contribute on special teams, which is a very key role for someone who's the 4th running back potentially on game day. I thought Isaiah Spiller was just as impressive as Joshua Kelly, and Joshua Kelly got all the flowers because he had a run that didn't get called back by a holding penalty like Isaiah Spiller did in the preseason last year. I think this scheme fits Isaiah Spiller better than the scheme that they were running before.
I agree.
It's just really impossible. I mean, when they were talking about Jim Harbaugh and how he was evaluating this roster, he said, when we're watching tape, we're going back to the best, healthiest tape these guys have. And now we're talking about Isaiah Spiller when he was 19 playing at Texas A&M. I don't know what this coaching staff thinks behind closed doors, but I think their actions outside of that have told you how they feel about him. Like you said, it's really, really hard for me to imagine outside of an injury, Isaiah Spiller earning a role in this running back room right now, given Greg Roman's guys being there, given you went and drafted Kamani Vidal. I just don't see it, but I totally think you're right, Joe. We never really see him get a chance. But as far as like coaching and getting better and stuff like that, a lot of that has to do with what the dudes are doing in the offseason. Those dudes and how much work they're putting in there and getting coached up there. Once the season starts, nobody cares to keep holding your hand and bringing you up to speed. If you're good enough, you play.
They don't have time for that.
And the last regime told you he wasn't. And that's really all we have to go off of, really fair or not. So let's get to this last question here really quickly, David, from Stephen Gillard, who asked, what do you predict will be the strategy we see from the Harbaugh administration in regards to the preseason? We did this question before, David, and you didn't think the Chargers would play their starters in the preseason. You said, hey, Justin Herbert will never play in a preseason game. Have you changed your tune at all?
I have, actually. I have changed my tune a little bit. And I think it with Jim Harbaugh, coming in, you have a whole new offensive system. You got a whole new defensive system. I do feel like, the starters, including Justin Herbert, will get out there and play a couple of series. I feel like it's just something that, is almost a must. Joint practices are great, but you can't just replicate the real thing. I feel like it's something that Jim Harbaugh will do at least a couple of series in the preseason.
The biggest thing here is that he has started his starters in the preseason before. So unless Jim Harbaugh has had some sort of kind of,
change of
some
heart.
sort of come to moment where he's saying, you know what, it's actually not good to play them. Maybe Ben Herbert's a guy that's saying, hey, don't play that. That's what we don't know.
Right.
if we're going based on what he did in the past with Greg Roman and him together, they played their starters in the preseason. Whether it was Alex Smith or Colin Kaepernick, those guys played in the preseason. The big thing will be if one single guy gets injured, one important player for them gets injured, how do the Chargers fans react?
Yeah.
Because that was the one thing under Brandon Staley is, and I agree for the most part, when you have a new offense and things like that, especially I think for the offensive line in this running game and trying to get those guys connected, trying to get the tight ends involved and the wide receivers to go block, there are a ton of benefits to playing your starters in the preseason. And there's one big bad thing that can happen, and that is a big impactful injury, which you have to take into account. How much are you willing to risk it? How much are you willing to play those guys? Because those starters that I talked about before with the 49ers played in multiple games. So we'll see now. It's 3 games, not 4 games like they used to have back then. It is the first year in all of these new systems. I was with you when I thought that Justin Herbert would never play in a preseason game, but Jim Harbaugh has done it differently. So I think we have to listen to that. I do think you will see the starters in the preseason. But that is going to wrap things up for today's show. Make sure you guys are back here on Monday because it is your team every single day, and maybe we'll get into another UDFA Monday talking about some of the undrafted sleepers that could potentially make this roster or any of the news that comes out because it is also the start of OTAs next week. It is actual news content coming out, and we are the only show that will be with you every day for it. So to make sure you don't miss it, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from, as well as finding our show every single day on all of our social media. You can find me at Dan Talk Sports and David at Dro Talk ST on Twitter, as well as the show's page at Locked On LAC. And you can also find us on Instagram at Locked On Chargers and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. Thank you to everyone who called in the voicemail line today. Lots of voicemails at 323-524-7924. Get your 30-second Chargers question in there, and we'll treat this like a good old-fashioned sports radio show because we love hearing from you guys. But make sure you guys are back here on Monday because it is your team every day. But until then, take it easy and go Bolts.